guys, Jessica here. This year is flying. I've lost all sense of time and reasonable response. As I'm recording, we're in the first week of April, which means the first quarter of 2022 is over and it's time to reflect and look at my best reads. This year, I've only read about 12 books in the first quarter. That's significantly less than I read last year, same time. I did commit to reading less this year than I did last year, and also I have still been trying to get settled into the new house and get everything set up, ready to go. And I've had a couple other personal things going on. I just really haven't had that much time to read. Of these 12 books, only 4 of them really stood out to me. These are in no specific order, it's just what was first on my reading list. The first thing I really enjoyed was book 3 of the Aspect and Anchor series by Ruby Dixon, Wed to the Wild. I read the first book at the very end of 2021, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I was really curious about the wild god, where he'd gone, what happened to him, etc., etc. So I skipped book 2, jumped right into book 3, and I had a lot of fun with it. Ruby Dixon wrote Ice Planet Barbarians, so she's got that kind of inviting, wild, give up the world you're in sort of scenario and just go with what's happening now. I'm still really early into this Aspect and Anchor series and reading it a lot slower than I did Ice Planet Barbarian, kind of consuming one at a time when I feel like it and only really looking at the books that interest me instead of reading every single one of them back to back. I was a little bit disappointed with the series because it's a completely different god system than any of the ones that we know here, and I was hoping for a little bit of traditional mythology. But I do really enjoy the made-up world Ruby Dixon's created. There's some aspects about it I don't like, and I talked about it in my summary of book 1 on my Goodreads page. This particular book, number 3, does pretty well in avoiding some of the pitfalls that I found in book 1. I don't know if it's just that I got used to the idea here, or if it's because the majority of this book is told in our world versus the alternate world, or if it's something else entirely. But I did like this book a lot better than I liked book 1, and it is making me think about either going back to book 2 or moving forward further in the series. Next book that I really enjoyed was Omnia by Gallego. This one was a translated work. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. It's kind of like a modern fantasy / sci-fi story, and it's probably geared more towards a middle grade young adult, early spectrum young adult audience than it is towards an adult audience. Overall, I found the prose to be very simple and the concepts to be sort of basic, but because of that, it left a lot of exploration for me, my interpretation of what Omnia was, whether Omnia was good or bad. It's very open-ended, and I enjoyed that it was told from the perspective of an 11-year-old boy. So some of the things that I as an adult was considering and wondering were not on his radar at all, and some of the things that he was interested in or enjoying or worried about were stuff that I was
that's a side note compared to all these other things going on.
Let's backtrack and hit Omnia's summary. So we're following this 10 or 11-year-old boy around. He throws out his younger sister's favorite toy, and they know they can't get it back, and she's really upset. The family kind of blames him for it. So he's trying to get a copy of it, and that's when he's introduced to Omnia, which is an online realtor that can deliver anything to you from any time period or any world. Now, there are some doubts about whether or not it can do this. People do seem to get very odd objects from Omnia, but the world around this boy is very similar to ours, so it's hard to say if this Omnia claim is a lie or if it's some kind of brag or joke. And the book sort of talks a little bit about this speculation, but it's kind of to the side of the perspective of this boy, because he does find a stuffed animal that looks exactly like the one his sister lost. He finds out that it's lost somewhere in the warehouse. Omnia is not going to be able to deliver it to him, so he sneaks into the Omnia plant to try and find this rabbit for her sister. And we all just kind of go on this journey with him. First, how he gets into the Omnia place. Once he's there, what happens to him, and his attempts to journey back when Omnia Corporation tries to stop him. I really enjoyed it. It has some absurd elements that are kind of fun and dreamlike, and it has a lot of corporate speak that reminded me of working at certain jobs I had had in the past, and certain catchphrases or logic and reasoning that you would see in a major corporation. I think this book has a lot of things for people at different levels, and you can see different elements of it that might be making some commentary on corporate structures and some commentary on the way that future consumerism is going without being too condemning or too obvious. There's just like a couple of thoughts that aren't 100% finished, a couple questions that are being asked that aren't really answered in the story, and I just kind of thought that was like a fun, open-ended read. Next is going to be The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. I read this all the way back in January when I decided I was going to read a couple more science fiction classics. It was not the story I expected, and I'm going to get more into that in a separate video. Overall, I would say that there are some elements of the story that didn't age well, and there are other elements that are really interesting and relevant today. I would check a summary, see someone else's trigger warnings, see where you land on it, but there was just like so many things I wanted to talk about after I had read this story. I really enjoyed myself. I had a good time with it. I can see why so many of H.G. Wells are classics, and I think it's still worth reading The Island of Dr. Moreau today, even though some elements of it don't hold up well. Then the last one on this list is actually going to be The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. This was another one where I was a little bit conflicted, and I was surprised by some of the insights that H.G. Wells had made in the story. It's kind of a slow start, and the slow start isn't as interesting in The Time Machine as it was in The Isle of Dr. Moreau. In The Isle of Dr. Moreau, the main character is shipwrecked and adrift at sea, and I really like that man versus nature conflict and the general surviving at sea as long as you can story, where the Time Machine setup is like a bunch of science gobbledygook and like a bunch of gentlemen taking wagers and assuming what a person can and can't do, all of which I was just not into. But when we finally got to the part where we hear about the story of the man traveling in time, that was really interesting. Some of the mechanics of how it worked interested me, and what he saw with the future people, some of the observations he made about their society versus his current society, what there's a need for now versus what it will be like in the future, all was neat, and some of it was still relevant. There are some issues with it. This is going to be something you run into with any classic work you read, though. Both of these were published in the late 1800s, so some of the sensibilities of that time period are just different than our sensibilities now. And if that's something that you don't want to read, I get it, but I would see what the warnings are and see if you're interested or not. It's really neat because both these stories show some basic science fiction roots, and I could see where like a lot of today's creepypastas and some other horror works I've seen have gotten inspiration. I can also see why some of these questions continue to plague us, and we continue to speculate and write science fiction that's like an updated version of this today. Those are the 4 things I read in the first quarter of 2022 that I really enjoyed. What was your favorite read so far this year? Let me know in those comments down below. And if you're looking for more science fiction reads you can get through Kindle Unlimited, I have a playlist for that here. I want to thank you guys for watching, and as always, keep reading. Bye!